The latest. Thank you for your love and support. I appreciate you all. It's so beautiful how we are finding out the truth concerning who we are. We have been fed with lies for a very long time, but this time round, everything is coming out to the open. Our brother in Nigeria is telling us some truth that is shocking. How Nigeria was growing, how the economy of Nigeria was able to stand, only for it to come back to where it is now. Because Nigeria was working with China, moved away from the Western America, and this became a threat to the United States of America. A lot of us, when we talk about the West being the reason to quit Africa is where it is, majority of us do not believe it. Even he said it, that if it were to be years ago that he was told this, he will never believe it, because he will be thinking, how can the great United States of America be concerned about what is happening in Nigeria? But that because they wanted the resources at a cheap price, they needed to put in measures to stop Nigeria from moving with China, because they've seen that China is helping the economy to rise up, and any economy that is rising up, the United States of America sees it as a threat. So they have to act fast and make sure Nigeria, as large as it is with this huge population, they have to put it under control. That the United States of America acts like an emperor of the world, because they depend and they survive on other people's natural resources. So in order for them to continue to be getting cheap resources, they need to do certain things to...
Is this just economic incompetence, or is it a carefully masked redistribution of national resources among a few? In short, was Nigeria robbed blind or just misled by fools?
If you don't understand the geopolitical context, that question will confuse you, because for years I didn't understand it either, and I didn't understand what incentive does anybody who is a Nigerian head oversee the destruction, the decimation of the Nigerian economy. If you do better, you make more money if Nigerians are prosperous, if the economy is growing. So I didn't understand that for years until I understood the geopolitical context that Nigeria existed in. So what a lot of us didn't understand at the time was that the fact that Nigeria's economy was growing, first of all, wasn't something that was happening in a vacuum. So it wasn't just growing because, well, there's a decent president who has good policies and that's that. There was a context for that growth. First of all, Nigeria was an economic partnership with China. So an infrastructure partnership, a trade partnership, even a currency partnership with China. And as you know, China for many, many years now has been the economy. Some also claim that it has already overtaken the US in PPP terms and has become the world's biggest economy outright. So basically, China's rising tide was lifting Nigeria's boat. Now, what a lot of us didn't understand was that the US State Department at the time saw this as a strategic threat to Nigeria's interest. Now, if you had told me this 10 years ago, I'd have scoffed at you. That, well, why would the US State Department care about what Nigeria does or doesn't do? Nigeria is not important to America. Nigeria is one tiny village compared to America. That's how many of us used to think, until we became more educated on the subject and we came to the understanding that the US doesn't function as just a country. It sees itself as a global empire. It sees itself as the ruler of the world, as the ruler of the planet. And it's not in US foreign policy doctrine to accept the existence of what it calls a near peer rival. That's a country that is comparable to it in economic strength or in military strength or in industrial strength. It's not in US doctrine to talk so that it doesn't get another Russia or another China on its hands, because those are three countries which it absolutely cannot dominate because of the size of their defense capabilities. Because at the time was starting to enter a point in its development where it would have become very difficult to keep Nigeria within the US geopolitical ambit. Bear in mind that officially Nigeria is a non-aligned country like most of Africa, but as I'm sure you're aware, for most of Nigeria's post-independence history, it has been aligned with the US de facto. even though it hasn't been officially stated, but it's the US.
Hmm.
So the increasing partnership between the Yar'Adua and the Goodluck Jonathan administrations, especially, was making it such that Nigeria was being taken out of America's geopolitical ambit and increasingly into the Chinese economic, political, and defense ambit, which the US considered unacceptable. So, one of the goals of 2015, in addition to removing Nigeria from China's geopolitical ambit and returning it to the American fold, was also to ensure that the economic heft that Nigeria commanded, power that Nigeria commanded as the largest economy in Africa, with the capacity Africa with it, the heft, size of Nigeria's economy in and of itself was considered to be a threat. And then you would ask, why is that? Why would a $500 billion economy be a threat to a 20 trillion? Simple reason, and they have said this themselves, and you don't have to take my word for it. You can Google something called the Kissinger report. That's National Security Memo 200, written in, I believe, 1976, under U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, where it states clearly that U.S. foreign policy doctrine for Africa is that it is a place that is a source for cheap raw materials. Not just raw materials, but raw materials. And that if anything is to happen, which is to raise the prices of those raw materials, such as sustained population growth, which leads to industrial capacity in those places, so those countries start to use their own resources for themselves and they're no longer selling it cheap. Anything that happens like that, increased industrial capacity, increased population, increased geopolitical power, is a strategic threat to U.S. national security interests, because the U.S. is dependent on cheap African resources for its industry. So not just African resources, cheap African resources. So where you have an African economy that, bear in mind, between 2017 and 2015, Nigeria's economy more than doubled. It went from about $274 billion in 2007 to about $568 billion as at the start of 2015. On that trajectory, it was predicted by 2020, it's probably predicted to become Africa's first $1 trillion economy. When a country becomes a $1 trillion economy on the world's most resource-rich continent, you can imagine the knock-on effect that is going to have.
Yeah.
That country is going to become an industrial superpower. It's also going to become a military superpower. It's only a matter of time.
Yeah.
And when that happens, control these 54 African states, and it has less access to their cheap natural resources, and those resources start getting more and more and more expensive, which becomes a threat to the American-led world order. So again, that's the geopolitical context that Nigeria existed in 2015, which a lot of us, self-included, were just completely unaware of.
Wow, self-included. David, I will hold you on that one.
So any nation like China and Russia that is coming into the scene to help us to develop in terms of infrastructure becomes a threat. Because when your economy is doing well and the population is growing, then you become a threat to these people. They will no longer get the cheap natural resources they are getting from your country. They don't have what it takes to buy things at an expensive price to develop their nations. And that is why they always go into countries, invading them, claiming ownership of the resources in those countries. There are a lot of things that we need to look out for. We need to dig out the truth. We have to now start seeing who is really the reason to which we are not developing. Ever since Nigeria detached itself from China, we saw that the economy of Nigeria is back to where it is. Because when the economy is doing well, that is when you have people who will be prosperous. There will not be poverty, there will not be hardship. And the United States of America do not like that. They don't want to see people free. So they have to always rise to fight. And ever since they succeeded, look at the narrative in Nigeria today. Nigeria is the giant of Africa. With this huge population, with the oil they have, but we are seeing that things are not better in that country. So they will always go after leaders that are fighting them to give us sovereignty. And that is the reason to which we are calling for unity in Africa. This should have been the perfect time that all the African leaders would team up with Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso so we can stand on our feet. Because if we should decide to fight the battle individually as a nation, these people have upper hand to cripple us. Now let's see Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. They are not able to penetrate them because they have united. They are doing these things to please themselves because they always carry the agenda of American first. But America must start looking for things within its country to take care of its problems. We've seen that they are trying to invade Venezuela because of oil, but Nicolas Maduro is up, ready to fight them. According to him, Venezuela is no longer the yesterday Venezuela. This is a new Venezuela, and they are ready to fight to protect their territory and protect their resources. This should be the narrative of Africa. We should be ready to fight. And we can only do that when we are united. There are a lot of things we are finding out, but majority of us still do not believe it. We always see the leaders to be the problem. We cannot continue to be suffering with the resources only for it to benefit them. Like the Brazilian president said, there is no emperor in this world. This is an information era. We need to feed ourselves with the right information so we can emancipate ourselves to rise up and fight. We are the only ones that can set ourselves free. United we stand, divided we fall, and united we keep standing forever and ever. The greatest enemy of the African is mental slavery. So let's decolonize ourselves from mental slavery. Let's keep sharing to educate our brothers and sisters. Together we make Africa great for ourselves and the next generations that are going to come. So that's the latest around the world, in Africa, West Africa, and in Nigeria.